بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله الأمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We move on inshallah today to another section of the book of purity, and that is the major purity, which deals with ghusl. So a lot of the Islamic terminology may be a little bit strange for those who are not used to Arabic. So when we say janabah, this is the state of sexual impurity. Janabah. And when we say a person is junub, we're describing the person himself to be in the state of sexual impurity. And we have ghusl. And ghusl is the total bath, the obligatory or mandatory bath, where a person takes so that he would uplift the state of sexual impurity or the state of janaba. And is ghusl only for the state of janaba? Well, ghusl itself can be for mandatory ghusl and it can be voluntary ghusl. So the mandatory ghusl is for the things that you know of, such as, first of all, the state of janaba, sexual impurity, or when a woman who is in her menses or in post-delivery bleeding, when the bleeding stops and she's pure, she has to take this ghusl. And it's an issue of dispute whether a non-Muslim, when he accepts Islam, is it mandatory for him to take ghusl or not? And the most authentic opinion and the safest is that it is mandatory for him to take ghusl, because even if he says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, he is in the state of sexual impurity. He never took a ghusl, proper ghusl before, so it is mandatory for him to do that. And also in the case of washing a dead body, is it mandatory or not? Some schools of thought say it is mandatory, because this is backed by a hadith where the Prophet says, whoever washes a dead body must perform ghusl, and whoever carries a funeral must perform wudu. This hadith is authentic, but it was abrogated. That was in the beginning, and then the Prophet said, khalas, there is no need for that. Whoever washes a dead person, a dead Muslim, he does not have to perform ghusl, because the Muslim is pure, and this was abrogated. So we move on to hadith number 31, hadith of Aisha. And who will read it for us? Yes, Muhammad.
Aisha radiallahu anha said, whenever Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam took the bath of janaba, he cleaned his hands and then performed ablution like that for prayer, and then rubbed his hair till he felt that the whole skin of the head had become wet. Then he would pour water 3 times and then wash the rest of the body. Aisha radiallahu anha further said, I and Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to take a bath from a single water container from which we took water simultaneously.
Okay, this hadith is informing us about a particular way of doing ghusl. And we will have the hadith of Maymuna, may Allah be pleased with her, also, that describes it, but a little bit differently. As in the case of Uthman, may Allah be pleased with him, telling us about the wudu of the Prophet, and Abdullah ibn Zayd telling it a little bit different. In this, we know that the Sharia, Islam, is so rich that it is not rigid and limited in this way or that way. It gives you a variety of choices. But as Muslims, you do not have the choice to go outside the loop of these choices. These choices are for you to choose. You want to wash your hands once, twice, or 3 times, it's up to you. But don't do 4 times. And don't definitely do less than 1 time, because you will not be doing it. Likewise in offering ghusl. We mentioned the ghusl which is mandatory, and we forgot to mention the ghusl that is voluntary. Can you remind me? Yes, before Eid prayer. This is an issue of dispute among scholars whether it is part of the sunnah or not, because there isn't any specific hadith, but there is a specific hadith in what prayer? Jum'ah. Jum'ah prayer is without doubt. It is recommended, and some schools of thought make it mandatory. But the most authentic opinion is that it is voluntary and recommended. So this is for Jum'ah, as the brother said. Some scholars said even for Eid it is voluntary, and so on. Something we do once in a lifetime, at least, before making ihram. Before making ihram for Umrah or for Hajj, the sunnah is that you wash, even if a woman in her menses. Imagine, if a woman in her menstruation, she's not going to pray, she's not going to fast. Yet before making ihram, the sunnah for her is to take ghusl, to make ghusl, and a number of different things. So, going back to hadith of Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her. What is the definition of ghusl in Arabic? It is to wash your whole body with water. So scholars from this linguistic definition came up with the conclusion that there is one ghusl which is according to sunnah, like in the case of hadith Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, and there is one ghusl that is sufficient to uplift the sexual impurity, though it is not in accordance to the sunnah. How is that? The acceptable minimum requirement for ghusl is to go and dip yourself in the sea and come out, turn the water in your mouth, inhale and blow the water from your nose, and that is it. You've committed ghusl. So scholars say if you stand under the shower with the intention of ghusl and you shower yourself totally and make a madmada and istinshaq and istinthar for your nose and leave, this is valid ghusl. But this is not the sunnah. So what is the sunnah? We go back to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. First of all, what is the first thing the Prophet ﷺ would do before making ghusl? Washing the hands. And this is always so that you will purify your hands before putting it in the vessel. After washing his hands, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in this hadith. Now I'm referring only to this hadith because there is the hadith of Maymuna where he washes his private parts first before making wudu. But we will stay with this hadith. So the Prophet performs wudu, normal wudu. And here it does not say if he includes his feet or not. So we assume that he includes his feet. So he performs normal wudu, yet he's still in the state of janaba. Then he takes a scoop of water and he rubs his head so that until he feels that the skin itself, the roots of the hair, has been moisturized with water, have been wet, then he takes 3 scoops of water and pours it all over his head. After that, he washes all of his body, and that is his ghusl. Very simple. She says that she and the Prophet ﷺ used to wash from the same container. They used to make ghusl from the same container. And from this, scholars say that it is permissible for a man to see his wife nude, and for the wife to see her husband nude, because the man and his wife don't have any awrah. And that is why it is part of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to bathe with your wife. This is part of the Prophet sunnah. Unfortunately nowadays, men and women are so apart. Their emotions are very rigid. We neglect a lot of the things that the Prophet used to do ﷺ. Among them, for example, the Prophet used to eat with Aisha, and whenever she took a bite from a piece of meat, he would take that meat and look where she put her mouth, and he would eat from that. And if she drinks milk, he would take the cup and watches where she put her lips and drink from the same place. Do we do this nowadays? You crazy, Sheikh? What do you mean by do we do this? If my wife eats from the plate with a spoon, I go and tell her, bring me another spoon please. She says, no, you can use mine. So I know I can use yours, I don't want to use yours. Go and bring another one that's clean. Is this the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? Definitely not. And that is why our relationship between the husbands and wife are very bad, are very sad. There is a distance between the spouses. There isn't anything except maybe the physical relationship that would probably take a couple of minutes, and that is it. Then the rest of the day, there is no connection, and this is wrong. The relationship with your spouse should be much, much closer than that, because Allah described it in the Quran, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنْ, that they and you are garments for each other. You know each other's shortcomings and you know each other's faults, and no one else can share this knowledge except you. We move on to the second hadith, the hadith of Maymuna. Maymuna, who is Maymuna bint al-Harith, by the way? Do we know anything about her? How is she related to the Prophet ﷺ? Well, to know this, you have to wait until we break, so stay tuned. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Welcome back, and to go back to our question, who is Maymuna bint al-Harith, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ? Is she related to him, or is she the sister of someone we know? No. Maymuna bint al-Harith is the sister of al-Fadl. May Allah be pleased with her. Who is al-Fadl? The wife of Al-Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib. Who is Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib? The uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. And that is why Abdullah ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with them, used to always spend the night in her house. Why? Because she is his aunt. And by this he would be able to sit in his cousin's house and watch how he used to perform. And that is why a lot of the hadith that Ibn Abbas narrated, may Allah be pleased with him, were taken from the house of Maymuna. For example, the hadith of spending the night and watching the Prophet sleep, and then watching him wake up in the middle of the night, Ibn Abbas pretending to be asleep, and then making wudu from a leather container, and then starting to pray night prayer. Ibn Abbas says, I stood up and stood to the left of the Prophet in prayer. That was the house of Maymuna. The Prophet held his ear and took him until he stood at his right, and he prayed night prayer with the Prophet ﷺ. All of this is in the house of Maymuna. So Maymuna is telling us how the Prophet ﷺ used to perform ghusl. Now, we know that the Prophet had more than 4 wives ﷺ. And sometimes he's criticized by this, from the disbelievers, from the atheists, from the Christians, from the Jews, from the kafir. They're saying that the Prophet married more than 4 wives. He had a lot of women. He was a womanizer. Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. The Prophet ﷺ married 1 wife until he was 53 years of age. If anyone would have been a womanizer, 53 is the last age you would think of marrying again. Right or not? If you were a womanizer, you would take the best of your youth when you're 25, when you're 30. And not only that, he married his wife when he was 25 years old. And the majority of scholars say that his wife, Khadija, was 40 years old. So when he was in his prime, when he was 50, she was almost 60 years old. So if he was a womanizer, he would have married again and again and again, but he did not. Only until she died, he married again. And all the Prophet's wives, ﷺ, were not virgins. And men, by nature, they desire virgins. But the majority, all of them, except Aisha, all of them were either widowed or divorcees or married before, and their husbands were not Muslim. So one of the wives whom he had married was same as his age, 53 years old when he married her. Would a womanizer do such a thing? Definitely not. The Prophet ﷺ married to get all of his companions together to make a nation, and at the same time so that we could learn how he would behave when he's in home. So it was not reported to us by one wife, two wives. It was reported to us by 9 wives, and they all conveyed to us how he was in his house. The hadith of Maymuna, number 32, who would read it for us? Yes, Ashi.
Narrated Maymuna bint al-Harid. I placed water for the washing of Allah's apostle Janaba. He poured water with his right hand over his left, twice or thrice, and then washed his private parts and rubbed his hand on the earth or on a wall twice or thrice, and then rinsed his mouth, washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out, and then washed his face and forearms, and poured water over his head and washed the rest of his body. Then he shifted from that place and washed his feet. I brought a piece of cloth, but he did not want it, and instead removed the traces of water from his body with his hand.
So,
Al-Bukhari.
Okay, the hadith is similar a lot to the hadith of Aisha. However, the differences are, first of all, after washing the hands 3 times or twice, he washed his private part. And this is the sunnah. For anyone who has a sexual impurity, janaba, the first thing to do is, after washing his hands, washing your private part. And then he hit the floor or the wall. And why is that? To remove any impurity that stuck into his hand after washing his private part. And nowadays, you don't do this, because the bath itself or the wall, the ceramic wall, would not do you any good. But we have instead detergents or soap. We can do that and it would clean our hands, inshallah. After that, he started ablution. But she did not say that he performed ablution. She described it. She said that he turned the water in his mouth and cleaned his nose, and after that washed his face and his arms. So this is wudu, actual wudu. And then he poured the water on his head, cleaning all of his head, and then he stepped aside and washed his feet. So this wudu, he ﷺ postponed washing the feet until the very end. In Aisha's hadith, he performed full wudu, including the feet. And why did he move aside? Scholars say, so that he would be in a cleaner place. And then she brought him a piece of cloth, a towel or something. The Prophet did not want it, and he just shook his hands and shook the water off his body. This is another way of performing ghusl. And a third way, which is the most authentic, all of these are authentic hadith, but the details are in this way I'm going to tell you. First, you wash your hands. Second, you wash your private part. Then you wash your hands again. Then you make a full wudu, with the exception of not washing your feet. Everything until you come to the wiping of the head. And then you wash your hair and head until you ensure that the water have reached your skull. So the whole skin is wet. And afterwards you pour the water on the right side of your body, arms, legs, etc. And then you wash the left side of your body until you are sure and certain that the whole body was covered with water. Do I have to rub it? The scholars say it's not a must, but it is recommended. Why? What is best, to pour water or to rub it? Rubbing it, because by rubbing it you are definitely sure that the water has covered it. But when you pour it, sometimes the water does not cover a particular area, but it is not a must. Scholars say that rubbing it is recommended, yet it is not a must. And then after this, the final thing you do is wash your feet, as the Prophet did, alayhi salatu wassalam. Now, this is the sunnah as stated before. This is the sunnah of making wudu. But if you're on the seashore and you're in the state in janaba, all what you do is you dip yourself in the water with the intention of making ghusl, turn the water in your mouth, clean your nose, and come out. That's it. You have performed ghusl. So this is the best way of doing it. Now, we will come to find out that the sunnah is to use as minimum as possible of water, because excessive use of water is not part of the sunnah. And if you go to places where they have rivers and rain and you name it, they have no shortage of water at all, you will find in the hotels, you will find in the streets, you will find everywhere, conserve the usage of water. SubhanAllah. Even in places like the UK, for example, with the rivers and the streams and the rain that is 24 hours, they're still calling people to conserve in their usage of water. Our religion did this 15 centuries ago, when the Prophet ﷺ used to perform wudu in this much. Imagine this much. Is it enough to make wudu? Who says yes, it is? 1, 2, 3. I made myself wudu with it. I tried it myself. At first I thought that it was impossible, but I gave it a try. I was off-roading once with the family and it was time for prayer. I told them, just bring me this much. And I started making wudu. MashaAllah. More than enough. But when we make wudu nowadays, how many gallons do we need? We turn on the faucet and we sing, we dance, we whistle, and it would take us probably 10, 20 liters. If we're taking a bath, subhanallah, we need a swimming pool. Because my voice is as beautiful as it can be in the bathroom when I sing, when all the family is doing this. I know, but to me it sounds very nice. So this is exactly what the sunnah came to tell us. Conserve water, and we will get to know this inshallah later on. Do we have any questions? Yes, brother.
Is it necessary when in the process of doing the ghusl, the water should touch all the part of the body? What if some part of the body is left out, untouched with the water?
Muhammad Aman, can you please tell me?
He's asking that, is it necessary that we wet the whole of our body if some part of the body is left dry? So,
oh yes, oh yes. If some part of the body was left dry, you did not perform ghusl. You have to cover every part of your body. So for example, if I leave this big in my arm, I did not wash, my ghusl is invalid. I have to wash it. I'm afraid that this is all the time we have. Until we meet next time, fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.